a cruise ship murder sends shockwaves through the industry. Bahamas Excursion goes from fun to flesh-eating, and U.S. authorities quietly deport 10 cruise ship crew members after a chilling discovery. And that's not all. Cruise passengers, if you're heading to Mexico, be prepared for a new fee. But there's some silver lining to that. Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. And this week in cruise news, it's been an interesting one. First, let's talk about the murder at sea. Now, it was supposed to be a short party cruise to Belgium, or what they call over the pond a stag party or a bachelor party. But within hours of disembarking at the port in Southampton in England, it turned into what one passenger described as total carnage. James Messam, a 60-year-old grandfather and former stuntman, died aboard MSC Virtuosa. Police arrested a 57-year-old man on suspicion of murder, but he has since been released on bail. They're back on land now. Eyewitnesses describe absolute chaos. Bachelor and bachelorette parties, lots of heavy drinking, bar staff serving guests until they were, according to one observer on this sailing, quote, paralytically drunk, and fights breaking out around the pool deck. And let me remind you again, this is not Carnival, this is MSC. One young couple aboard said that they heard cheering and shouting only to see another fight erupt nearby. So it sounds like it was pure mayhem. Some called the experience a modern-day Wild West. And this also wasn't in America. Now, this wasn't some spring break booze cruise, and that's often what gets the blame. It wasn't that turn-up Miami crowd, it wasn't young people. This was a European getaway, and the folks involved were not exactly spring chickens. And now, a family is left grieving, and many cruisers are asking, how on earth does this happen aboard a modern cruise ship? And this is a question I find myself asking a lot these days, almost every week, including the last 2 consecutive weeks of cruise news here. I've asked this question because I have been covering all of these physical altercations that are happening on cruise ships. Now, the bigger issue here, it's not just about alcohol, and I do think that is a huge contributing factor, but it's also about the atmosphere, the vibe. Cruise lines like Carnival, which is the usual suspect in these altercations, but many of them, MSC, Royal Caribbean, where a man was beaten senseless exiting an elevator a couple of weeks ago. But cruise lines, they promote these short weekend sailings as budget-friendly escapes, and these short sailings sometimes attract large parties, bachelor parties, and at times behavior that encourages overconsumption of alcohol, and it doesn't reflect the typical cruise community. And I hate that these things continue making news. They're going viral. They're happening, it seems now, almost weekly. And in this case, it led to the most tragic end, which is a man's death and a man charged with literally murder. So I hate to see these things happening because it's turning off a lot of newbies to cruising. They're seeing these news stories. They're thinking, why on earth would I pay money for an experience like that? That's violent, that's angry, that could risk my own physical safety. And they're turning away from it. Now, I do think that cruising inherently has some tendencies to attract more altercations. You're with the same group of people, yes, even if it's thousands, you're the same group of people in a contained space, sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7+ nights. So unlike a hotel or an all-inclusive resort where people come and go and it ebbs and flows, you've got these same group of people contained in one space for several days at a time. So you start to recognize people. Sometimes if people have beef early on the cruise, they keep seeing each other. That's what happened with the Galveston Brawl last week on Carnival Cruise Lines. 2 big groups, 2 families that kept beefing throughout the whole cruise, and that culminated to that big disembarkation brawl. So I think that cruising tends to be an environment that maybe attracts more violent behavior. And you also have cruise line security who aren't equipped with the same tools that security folks have on land. So that limits their ability to actually enforce. And in my experience, I have seen some physical altercations on cruises. I have seen lots of security having to get involved. I hate to say this, but security usually tends to be really small people. I'm 5'9" and I often tower over these people, and they don't have, again, a lot of these things that security have on land or that police have on land. So really the only enforcement tool they have are these guns, and they don't have those guns. So I think that is also a contributing factor as well. But I want to know what you think. And I've asked this question a million times before, but this altercation, it's different. It's not the usual one that you hear about here in the United States, and it's older people. So is alcohol the big contributing factor? Do cruise lines tend to overserve? Should they face the same type of dram shop laws that we have in the United States on land, where if a bar or bartender overserves a consumer, they go out and they engage in a car wreck, that bartender or that bar could be held legally liable? Should we have that version of it on the high seas? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you think that story was intense, wait until you hear about the next one. And if you have a sensitive stomach, consider this your warning. Now, this is one of the most Instagrammable cruise excursions in the Caribbean. And yeah, as an Instagram girly, I had to do this myself. So I've done this excursion. I liked it. Probably will never do it again, but it was a fun time. But it was not a fun time for a New York woman. Now, this woman is going viral for sharing her story after her dream excursion in the Bahamas turned into a 6-year-long health crisis. So this isn't new, but she's just now sharing her story, and it's going viral and spreading the word and awareness about a risk on a popular cruise excursion. Now, the trigger here, what caused this woman's health ordeal, was holding a piglet close to her face during one of those well-known swim with the pigs tours in the Bahamas. Specifically, hers was in Nassau. So she did the swim with the pigs tour, she held a piglet, she got her pictures for the gram, but then she started to develop some strange symptoms. She had facial swelling, she had gum pain, gastrointestinal issues, and lesions on her skin. Now, she of course sought medical treatment after her cruise. Dozens of doctors misdiagnosed her, and at one point she was even mistaken for a drug addict based on the lesions and her appearance. Now, it wasn't until she self-administered anti-parasite medication that she got from Mexico that doctors finally identified the culprit, thanks to her efforts, which was Ascaris suum, a parasitic roundworm, typically found in pigs. The CDC has warned that direct contact with pigs, especially in unsanitary water, can pose risks. And according to other travelers who've done the excursion, I've done it, I'll tell you my experience in a moment, but these pigs frequently relieve themselves in water as the guests wade beside them. And obviously they're wild animals. When they've got to poop, they've got to poop, and they're gonna poop. Now, the majority of pig swim participants don't get sick. I didn't have an issue. I'm lucky I didn't even see any poo, but the story serves as a serious reminder that you gotta be careful with this type of excursion. Now, in my experience, I did the swimming with the pigs excursion at Perfect Day at Coco Cay on a Royal Caribbean sailing. So we got off at Perfect Day, we had to take a boat over to this small little island that basically was just the pigs experience. We had to put our phones away because of course they want to sell you their photos, which they take with a GoPro. We then learned a little bit about the history of the pigs, and the pigs supposedly are rescues. So I think that's supposed to make us feel better that we're not exploiting animals. Then we got to go to this really small beach area that was kind of penned in. And there were pigs that were free roaming. They looked happy, they looked healthy. And then the guides kind of took us one by one into the water. We held the pig, we took a picture, and it was a cool experience. I like the photos that I got from it, but it's not anything I would ever do again. And now that I know about this story, and again, I didn't see any poo in the water during my experience, but chances are high you're gonna see poo in the water. I don't know. Other than getting a cool picture, the experience of swimming with the pigs themselves, in retrospect, it really wasn't that cool. And the excursion wasn't cheap either. So it was a bucket list for me. I did it for the gram, did it for the bucket list, but it was a one and done, and I have zero desire to try it again. And that's before I even heard about the flesh eating experience that this woman had. So if you're considering a swimming with the pigs experience, go at your own risk. Now, if you do this experience, experts recommend avoiding touching your face, don't hold pigs to your face, steer clear of open wounds, and make sure you wash thoroughly afterward. And that's hard because, at least in my case, we were fully submerged in the water, basically up to here. There aren't necessarily showers right there, so it's not like you hop out of the water, you take a shower. So that's a little easier said than done. So I wanna know, have you ever done a swimming with the pigs experience? Would you swim with the pigs, especially after hearing about this? Let me know what you think in the comments. And coming up, a quiet removal of cruise ship staff over some very serious concerns. Now, the headlines may be muted, but the implications are anything but, and this is very serious. A recent operation by U.S. Customs and Border Protection led to the arrest of one cruise ship crew member and the deportation of 10 others in connection with child sexual exploitation. The sting was coordinated between the Port of Galveston, Port Canaveral, and the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport Task Force. Investigators found disturbing content during routine checks, which led to immediate action. But here's what's causing concern. Only one crew member was officially arrested. The remaining 10 were just quietly deported with no public charges, no mugshots, no big releases, no big announcements. Their faces were blurred out in official CBP press materials, and no cruise line or ship names have even been disclosed. Now, a lot of cruise passengers, especially parents, are asking for answers. Why are we shielding the identity of the offenders? Why isn't more information being available? Now, according to cruise law experts, deportation without prosecution is legally permissible, but it creates a dangerous loophole. These individuals may not face charges in their home countries, and cruise lines are not required to notify future employers or guests if background checks are limited. Now, this isn't just a legal gray area, but it's a passenger safety concern. The cruise industry has made great strides in security and vetting, but things still happen. Just a few weeks ago, I reported on a tragic case of a young boy being sexually assaulted by two men who were fellow cruise passengers in a Royal Caribbean cruise ship sauna. So while they've made strides, things still happen. And when they do, transparency is essential to help cruisers feel safe and secure. So I want to know, do you think cruise lines should be required to report every crew-related arrest or deportation? Do you feel safe bringing your family on board? And at what age do you think that kids should be allowed to have some freedom on board? Share with me your thoughts. Now let's pivot to the business side of cruising. Let's talk nerdy, my favorite topic. And I'm going to share with you what you're going to be paying soon when your ship docks in Mexico. Now, this is a bad news but kind of good news scenario. Starting July 1st, all cruise passengers arriving in Mexico will be subject to a new $5 visitor fee. And that's bad. Nobody wants more taxes, especially in the era of taxes and tariffs. So it's just more money on top of escalating cruise fare. But this is actually a good thing. A few months ago, I reported how the Mexican government originally proposed out of the blue. There was no consultation with the cruise line industry. There was no forewarning. It was just bam. There's going to be a $42 per person charge coming this summer in 2025. So it hit everybody out of the blue. It caused a lot of uproar. And of course, the cruise line industry and the tourist boards got really involved. So after negotiations with the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association, the Mexican government has finally agreed to phase in a lower rate. So it's starting with $5, but be warned that $5 will eventually climb to $21 over the next 3 years. And that's per passenger. It's still unclear. I've looked at a lot of different sources. I cannot for the life of me figure out if this is per sailing or per port. I sadly suspect it's per port, and if it is, that fee is pretty substantial. So at over 20 bucks per person, if you're doing a Western Caribbean itinerary, which is popular, you're gonna be calling on Costa Maya and Cozumel. And if you have a family of 4, 2 ports, 4 family members, you're looking at almost 200 bucks. So this fee is pretty substantial. And that's just even in that phased approach. Now, you're not gonna see a kiosk or a turnstile. You're not gonna have to be paying bills as you get off the ship in Mexico, but this fee will be quietly rolled into your cruise fare going forward. Now, in Mexico's defense, they say that the revenue is important to support tourism infrastructure in port cities. But critics worry about transparency, how they went about this, and they wanna know whether the funds will truly benefit the communities hosting millions of cruise guests each year, because there's been some talk that this money is actually going to fund the Mexican military. Now, cruisers may remember that other popular ports have tried similar shenanigans and have had to pull back after industry pressure and after tourism declines. But Mexico, they are standing firm. With over 3,000 cruise ship visits expected this year alone, the country is looking to tap into that rising demand. So I want to know what you think about these port and destination fees. What do you think is reasonable? Are you bothered about $5 more per person? And then going forward, that phased approach over 20 bucks, is that going to change whether or not you choose to cruise to Mexico? Drop your comments below. And if you thought cruise ship costs were creeping up, they are, not just fares, but taxes. Get ready to talk about the likely continued increase because of the fact that cruise lines are supersizing everything. If you thought cruise ships were already big, just wait. Royal Caribbean, Carnival, MSC, and Norwegian, they're all in the midst of what can only be described as a mega ship race. And the numbers are jaw-dropping. Star of the Seas is Royal Caribbean's second Icon class ship. It's the sister ship to Icon of the Seas, and it's gonna be joining the fleet in August. Legend of the Seas follows in 2026, and Carnival's upcoming Giants, which are calling those the Ace class, they're estimated to have more than 3,000 cabins and 8,000 max passenger capacity. Now, MSC World America, which just started sailing, I have it booked for July, holds nearly 7,000 passengers. And another recent debut, Norwegian Aqua, has expanded capacity and 4 larger siblings along the way. Now, these aren't just cruise ships. They have morphed into floating cities. And for many travelers, like me, I do like the big ships. That's the appeal. Many of them feature different neighborhoods, dozens of restaurants, higher end entertainment, and activities, and even things like water slides that rival any theme park. But the bigger they get, the more complex the issues. First, not all cruisers like the big ships. Some find them overcrowded. I personally hate the elevator situation. It's always chaotic. But there's also significant environmental impact. Environmental groups are sounding the alarm on emissions, and port cities are grappling with issues of overcrowding. I recently was in Costa Maya that was at capacity, and one of the ships that was in port that day was Icon of the Seas, and I did an estimation, and there was something like 25,000 people in port that day, and I will tell you, it felt every bit like it. As a cruiser, it was a really unpleasant experience, so I don't like that either. And of course, if you're like me and you cruise to see the world and not just always go to Cozumel and Nassau, you will find that these mega ships can't get into a lot of these more charming, exotic port destinations. So I, for one, certainly hope cruise lines don't stop making smaller ships that can navigate to these more varied port cities. Still, the data are clear. Mega ships, they're popular, they're profitable, so they're not going anywhere. So what do you think? Do you like the mega ships? Would you sail on an 8,000 passenger ship? Does that sound like fun, or does that sound like hell? Or do you prefer something a little more modest? Let's talk about it in the comments. So from shocking crime stories to industry transformations, this has been an eye-opening week in cruise news. And I want to know what story stuck with you the most, and what did I miss? Let's keep the conversation going, and if you haven't yet, be sure to visit my website at profmelissa.com for free port guides, cruise tips, and all kinds of great free cruise info. And I'll see you next week from my own Mediterranean cruise.